And we're back with the final pandemics video. Thank you to everyone who has been tuning in. In part 1, we covered the coronavirus, SARS, Ebola, and leprosy. Then in part 2, we covered yellow fever, typhus, cholera, influenza, and tuberculosis. So now in part 3, we're going to cover the 4 deadliest pandemics in human history. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe. I only have about 8 subscribers, so let's try to get all the way to 9 with this video. Okay, without further ado. So you may be surprised to find out that measles is so high on this list, but historically measles was prevalent throughout the world as it is highly contagious. According to the US National Immunization Program, 90% of people were infected with measles by age 15 before the vaccine was introduced in 1963. There were an estimated 3 to 4 million cases in the US each year. 7 to 8 million children are thought to have died from measles each year before the vaccine was introduced. Measles killed around 200 million people worldwide over the last 150 years. 200 million. In 1980, there were 1 million deaths. In 1990, there was 545,000 deaths. And now yearly, there's about 75,000 deaths from measles, which are slightly increasing in part due to the anti-vaccination movement. In 2000 alone, measles killed some 777,000 worldwide out of 40 million cases. The first systematic description of measles and its distinction from smallpox and chickenpox is credited to the Persian physician Rhazes. This was all the way back in 860, around 900 AD, because he lived from 860 to 932 AD, who published the Book of Smallpox and Measles. Given what is now known about the evolution of measles, Rhazes' account is remarkably timely, as recent work that examined the mutation rate of the virus indicates that the measles virus emerged from rinderpest, what's known as the cattle plague, which was a zoonotic disease between 1100 and 1200 AD, a period that may have been preceded by limited outbreaks involving a virus not yet fully acclimated to humans. So basically this guy knew what was going on 100 years before the major measles outbreaks started occurring. Measles is an endemic disease, meaning that it has been continually present in a community and many have developed a resistance. In populations that have not been exposed to measles, exposure to a new disease can be devastating. In 1529, a measles outbreak in Cuba killed 2/3 of the native population who had previously survived smallpox. The disease also ravaged Mexico, Central America, and the Inca civilizations. The symptoms of measles are fever, cough, runny nose, inflamed eyes, and a rash. There's a 0.2% mortality rate, but coupled with malnutrition, it can spike all the way up to a 10% mortality. So measles mostly affects children. It can be spread through others through coughing and sneezing. Also, the measles virus can live for up to 2 hours in an airspace where the infected person coughed or sneezed. So you can kind of see how easily it is to spread. Treatment is keeping well with nutrition and fighting the symptoms, similar to the treatment for a lot of these diseases. It can be prevented with the MMR vaccine, and it goes hand in hand with creating a herd immunity, which is getting a substantial amount of the population vaccinated so that the odds of it being caught in the first place and spreading just goes down completely. So for the modern outlook, there are still about 20 million people per year who get measles. It's crazy to think about because, people think that measles is a disease, at least what my opinion was. I thought it was a disease that wasn't around anymore because of the MMR vaccine, but no, apparently it's very widespread throughout the world still, even today. So remember to get your kids vaccinated. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the plague. So, how many people died? Well, at one point, about 1/3 of Europe. This resulted in the deaths of about 75 to 200 million people in Eurasia, and Europe, peaking from about 1347 to 1351. It is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Humans usually get the plague after being bitten by a rodent flea that is carrying the plague bacterium, or by handling an animal infected with the plague. The first recorded epidemic affected the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and was named the Plague of Justinian, after the emperor at that time, who was infected but survived the plague. This pandemic resulted in the deaths of an estimated 25 million to 50 million, with 2 centuries of reoccurrence. The historian Procopius? I don't know, I'm not a historian, and I'm not good on my ancient Byzantine names, or even saying Byzantium. Okay, let's keep going. In his, his writings, he wrote of a personal encounter with the plague and the effect it had on the rising empire. In the spring of 542, the plague arrived in Constantinople. It worked its way up from port city to port city and spread around the Mediterranean Sea, later migrating inland eastward into the Asia Minor and west into Greece and Italy. So now we're going to talk about what most people think of when they hear about the plague, and that is the Black Death. The Black Death was thought to have originated in the dry plains of Central Asia or East Asia, where it traveled along the Silk Road, reaching Crimea by 1343. From there, it was most likely carried by fleas living on the black rats that traveled on all merchant ships, spreading throughout the Mediterranean basin and then Europe. It took 200 years for the world population to recover to its previous level. The plague resurfaced for a third time in the mid-19th century. Like the 2 previous outbreaks, this one also originated in Eastern Asia, most likely in the Yunnan province of China, where there are several natural plague foci. The initial outbreaks occurred in the second half of the 18th century. The disease remained localized in southwest China for several years before spreading. In the city of Canton between January 1894, the disease killed 80,000 people by June. Daily water traffic with the nearby city of Hong Kong rapidly spread the plague there, killing over 2,400 within 2 months. Also known as the modern pandemic, this third pandemic spread the disease to port cities throughout the world in the second half of the 19th century and the early 20th century via shipping routes. The plague infected people in Chinatown, San Francisco from 1900 to 1904, and the people of Oakland and East Bay again from 1907 to 1909. During the outbreak from 1900 to 1904 in San Francisco is when the authorities made permanent the Chinese Exclusion Act. This law was originally signed into existence by President Chester A. Arthur, who I talked about in another one of my videos. It's the video where I rank the presidents based on attractiveness. Go check it out if you want, or please don't. Okay, I could get more into the Chinese Exclusion Act, but this video is about pandemics and diseases, so I'm just going to skip ahead. The last major outbreak in the United States occurred in Los Angeles in 1924, though the disease is still present in wild rodents and can be passed to humans that come in contact with them. According to the World Health Organization, the pandemic was considered active until 1959, when worldwide casualties dropped to 200 per year. In 1994, a plague outbreak in 5 Indian states caused an estimated 700 infections, including 52 deaths. This is all the way in 1994, so that's pretty recent that the plague was killing 52 people. That's crazy. And it triggered a large migration of Indians within India as they tried to avoid the plague. So there are 3 types of plague. There's bubonic plague, septicemic plague, and pneumonic plague. In bubonic plague cases, patients develop sudden onset of fever, headache, chills, weakness, and 1 or more swollen, tender, and painful lymph nodes called buboes. This form usually results from the bite of an infected flea. The bacteria multiply in the lymph node closest to where the bacteria entered the human body. If the patient is not treated with the appropriate antibiotics, the bacteria can spread to other parts of the body. In septicemic plague, patients develop fever, chills, extreme weakness, abdominal pain, shock, and possible bleeding into the skin and other organs. Skin and other tissues may turn black and die, especially on the fingers, toes, and the nose. Septicemic plague can occur as the first symptom of plague or may develop from untreated bubonic plague. This form results from bites of infected fleas or from handling an infected animal. In pneumonic plague cases, patients develop fever, headache, weakness, and a rapidly developing pneumonia with shortness of breath, chest pain, cough, and sometimes bloody or watery mucus. Pneumonic plague may develop from inhaling infectious droplets or may develop from untreated bubonic or septicemic plague after the bacteria spread to the lungs. The pneumonia may cause respiratory failure and shock. Pneumonic plague is the most serious form of the disease and is the only form of plague that can be spread from person to person by infectious droplets. The plague is spread from infected animals and person-to-person contact. Plague bacteria are most often transmitted by the bite of an infected flea. During times of plague, many rodents die, causing hungry fleas to seek other sources of blood. People and animals that visit places where rodents have recently died from plague are at risk of being infected from flea bites. Dogs and cats may also bring plague-infected fleas into the home. Flea bite exposure may result in primary bubonic plague or septicemic plague. Humans can become infected when handling tissue or body fluids of a plague-infected animal. For example, a hunter skinning a rabbit or other infected animal without using proper precautions could become infected with plague bacteria. This form of exposure most commonly results in bubonic plague or septicemic plague. When a person has plague pneumonia, they may cough droplets containing the plague bacteria into the air. If these bacteria containing droplets are breathed in by another person, they can cause pneumonic plague. Typically, this requires direct and close contact with the person with pneumonic plague. Transmission of these droplets is the only way that plague can spread between people. This type of spread has not been documented in the United States since 1924, but still occurs with some frequency in developing countries. Cats are particularly susceptible to plague and can be infected by eating infected rodents. Sick cats pose a risk of transmitting infectious plague droplets to their owners or to veterinarians. Several cases of human plague have occurred in the United States in recent decades as a result of contact with infected cats. This is actually pretty shocking for me to hear because, at least in Venice, I know that cats were seen as a huge commodity because they would come in and kill all the rats and, you would think stop the disease. But it's pretty interesting to find out that cats also spread the disease, and not only that, they could be a major cause of modern day outbreaks. Anyway, let's get back on track. This video is starting to get pretty long and I still have 2 more diseases to talk about and I'm not going to make a part 4. So let's get back to treatment. Modern day plague and all forms of plague are treatable with antibiotics. The modern outlook today, because modern antibiotics are so effective in treating plague, it's really not much of an issue currently. But without prompt treatment, the disease can cause serious illness or death. Presently, human plague infections continue to occur in rural areas in the western United States, but significantly more cases occur in Africa and Asia. Now we are on to our second to last disease, malaria. In 2017, an estimated 219 million cases of malaria occurred worldwide, and of those cases, 435,000 people died. I did come across in my research an unlikely statement that malaria has killed half of the people who have ever lived. I'm pretty skeptical about this, but the death toll is likely, it's definitely in the hundreds of millions. How many hundreds of millions? I can't say, but it's very high, enough to be put at number 2 on this list. Malaria is a mosquito-borne disease caused by a parasite. Malaria stretches all the way back to prehistoric primates and has been intertwined with human history ever since. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus oh my god, I'm terrible with these old names, wrote that the builders of the Egyptian pyramids circa 2700 to 1700 BCE were given large amounts of garlic, probably to protect them against malaria. The pharaoh Sneferu, the founder of the 4th dynasty of Egypt, who reigned from around 2613 to 2589 BCE, used bed nets as protection against mosquitoes. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, similarly slept under a mosquito net. However, whether the mosquito nets were used for the purpose of malaria prevention or for more mundane purpose of avoiding mosquito bites is unknown. The presence of malaria in Egypt from circa 800 BCE onwards has been confirmed using DNA-based methods. The symptoms of malaria are chills, fever, and sweating, usually occurring a few weeks after being bitten. Nausea, vomiting, muscle pain, and fatigue are also some more symptoms that occur. The disease is spread through mosquito bites. It is rarely transferred between mother and infant and is also rarely transferred by blood transfusion, averaging about once every 2 years in the United States. Symptoms usually appear within 7 to 30 days, but can take up to 1 year to develop. Symptoms include high fevers, shaking chills, and flu-like illness. Without treatment, malaria can cause severe illness and even death. Travelers can prevent themselves from getting malaria by taking prescription medicine and preventing mosquito bites. So now we're on to the modern outlook. This went a lot quicker than the bubonic plague. I feel like I talked about the plague for like a solid 10 minutes. But okay, the modern outlook for malaria is every year there's about 1,700 cases and about 5 deaths occur among international travelers from the United States alone. There are hundreds of millions of infections a year. That sounds pretty crazy, wow. Within the last decade, increasing numbers of partners and resources have rapidly increased malaria control efforts. The scale-up interventions have saved millions of lives globally and cut malaria mortality by 25% from 2010 to 2016, leading to hopes and plans for elimination and ultimate eradication of the parasite. The CDC brings its technical expertise to support these efforts with its collaborative work in many malaria endemic countries and regions. Now we are at our final pandemic, our final disease, the one that has likely killed the most amount of people of all pandemics, and that is smallpox. Smallpox has killed an estimated 400,000 Europeans per year during the closing years of the 18th century. During the 20th century, it is estimated that smallpox was responsible for 300 to 500 million deaths. As recently as the early 1950s, an estimated 50 million cases of smallpox occurred in the world each year. Smallpox was a contagious disease caused by the variola virus. However, the exact origin of smallpox is unknown. Smallpox is speculated to date back as far as the Egyptian Empire around the 3rd century BCE, based on a small smallpox-like rash found on 3 mummies. The earliest written description of the disease that clearly resembles smallpox appeared in China in the 4th century CE. Early written descriptions also appeared in India in the 7th century and in the Asia Minor in the 10th century. After successful vaccination campaigns throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the WHO certified the eradication of smallpox in December 1979. To this day, smallpox is the only human infectious disease to have been completely eradicated, and one of 2 infectious viruses ever to be eradicated. The last natural outbreak of smallpox in the United States occurred in 1949. The symptoms for smallpox included high fever, rash, scabs, vomiting. It had a 30% mortality rate. Before smallpox was eradicated, it was mainly spread by direct and fairly prolonged face-to-face contact between people. Smallpox patients became contagious once the first sores appeared in their mouth and throat during the early rash stage. They spread the virus when they coughed or sneezed, and droplets from their nose or mouth spread to other people. They remained contagious until their last smallpox scab fell off. Smallpox can be spread by humans only. Scientists have no evidence that smallpox can be spread by insects or animals. So, although smallpox is gone, if it was to come back, there is no cure for smallpox. In the event of an infection, treatment would focus on relieving the symptoms and keeping the person from becoming dehydrated, and perhaps antibiotics would be prescribed if the person developed a bacterial infection, say in the lungs or on the skin. For the modern outlook, the CDC states that smallpox is currently used in experiments to create vaccines in the event of a bioterrorism attack wherein smallpox is unleashed. Wow, guys, so we finally made it to the end of the pandemics series. This was, it was a lot of research, but it was also a lot of fun to make. Just so you know, I'm probably not going to make another video on viruses or diseases, at least for a while. But hey, if you watched all 3 videos, thank you. Thanks for checking it out, and I hope you learned something too. If you haven't watched the other videos, I don't know, go check them out. I also made other videos, and if they interest you, yeah, why not give them a watch? Please subscribe. As I said at the beginning of the video, I'm currently at 8 subscribers. I'd like to get to 9, so maybe you can be that one special person that helps me get there. Also, leave a comment and like on the video, because that would be nice. Okay. Thank you for sticking around for so long. It's not the easiest to watch, like over an hour of someone talking about diseases who's not even a scientist. Okay, anyway, thanks so much. Bye-bye. Love you. Mwah.